Welcome to BlacPay R20 New Hire Training. What is rent to own? Rent to own is when you lease a home but have the option to purchase it at any time during your lease period or at the conclusion of the lease. During that time, the owner agrees that they will not market the home for sale because they have, in essence, promised to sell it to you. The first part of the rent-to-own agreement spells out what your monthly rent payment will be, and the second part binds the seller to sell to you at an agreed price, provided you meet the conditions agreement. What is an option fee? Not to be confused with a rental security deposit, an option fee is paid at the beginning of the lease period. It is generally not refundable, whether or not you decide to purchase the property. In the case of some rent-to-own agreements, the option fee may be applied towards the purchase price of the home. How much will my option fee be? 3 to 5% of the agreed-upon purchase price is a customary option fee. Anything above or below can be negotiated between the parties. The more you have to put down, the more attractive your offer will be to the seller. In addition, the more you put down as an option fee, the less you'll need to have financed somewhere else as the terms of your lease are about to expire. What is monthly rental credit? Most rent-to-own agreements contain a provision that puts a portion of the monthly rent payment aside as a credit towards the eventual purchase of the home. The amount varies by situation, but is sometimes as high as 50% of the rental payment. The obvious advantage to the tenant is that they begin building equity as they rent. In the case of BlacPay, it is 6% subject to qualification. What about less than perfect credit? BlacPay rent-to-own programs are designed with 3 people in mind: the hopeful homebuyer with less than perfect credit, the mid-income earner with no huge down payment, and the seller who's having a difficult time selling their home. Qualifying for a program like this is more about your ability to make the monthly payments. The period of the lease gives you time to make repairs to your credit or build home equity over the years with just rent. What if my credit isn't good enough when the lease expires? Before entering into any kind of contract, you should apply to BlacPay, and an agent will speak with you on your best options. Tell them your situation and allow them to give you a realistic view of where you will be in 3 to 5 years. If in a country where you need good credit, then join a reputable credit repair program to get your finances in order. Finally, be responsible for your credit during your rent-to-own term. Pay off old debt and don't add any new debt. Lease option overview. A lease option gives a tenant the opportunity to purchase a home, usually for a predetermined and agreed upon price at the end of a lease period that generally lasts for 3 to 5 years. BlacPay R20 and tenant typically execute a lease and a sales agreement at the same time. The tenant pays BlacPay R20 an upfront, non-refundable option fee for the right to purchase the home later. Some tenants also pay a modest monthly amount in addition to their rent. BlacPay R20 credits this additional payment towards the tenant's equity, of which 65% of 1/4 of the entire payment can be refunded in a situation of default or hardship. In these cases, the tenant forfeits the option fee if they choose not to exercise the option. They may also lose the rent credits unless the lease states otherwise. Lease option characteristics. A clear line between lease and purchase exists in a true lease option. First, apply online. Then, a tenant has a written lease and a written sales contract. The lease specifies a termination date. A lease option rent amount is expected to reflect market value rents for the neighborhood. In addition, the tenant acquires no equity or interest in the property during the lease term, nor are they responsible for investing their own money in improvements and repairs. Can a land sale be referred to as rent to own? A land sale or land installment sale is often not referred to as a rent to own agreement at BlacPay R20 because the tenant's payments aren't rent. What is a wraparound mortgage? A wraparound mortgage resembles a rent-to-own deal because the tenant pays the landlord rather than a mortgage lender, but it's actually a new mortgage a seller creates to pay off their own mortgage and in many cases generate cash flow. The tenant in this case is actually a buyer who makes payments to the seller. The seller uses the buyer's payment to make their own mortgage payment and keep any remaining money. This arrangement is risky for buyers because of the possibility, however slight, that the owner will stop making payments and allow the home to go into foreclosure. What is a lease to purchase option agreement? The lease to purchase option agreement is similar to a standard lease agreement between BlacPay R20 and the tenant. However, the lease agreement includes a provision providing the tenant with the option to buy the home. The seller continues to be the owner of the home and has all the rights as the property owner, while the prospective buyer only has rights as a tenant. Does BlacPay R20 have option consideration? The buyer is usually required to make a down payment towards the purchase price of the home in accordance with the lease to purchase option agreement. With BlacPay R20, we have a compulsory $2,000 membership fee and $230 non-refundable option agreement fee and zero down payment, which would have been called an option consideration. The amount is equivalent to a percentage of the price of the home. If the buyer breaches the lease agreement, for instance, by failing to make timely rental payments, the property owner may evict the tenant. Rent-to-own contracts often do not include provisions requiring the landlord to refund the option consideration to the tenant and, therefore, the tenant loses his investment in the home. During rent-to-own, the buyer lacks proper title because of the following reasons. In making a lease to purchase option agreement, the property owner loses rights to sell the home to a bona fide buyer. Similarly, this is often the case when a lien is on the property, such as a mortgage lien, and buyer must obtain approval from BlacPay R20 before selling the property to a prospective buyer for transfer of lease to purchase agreement. So in this case, we collect upfront a signed release legal document when tenants default and a power of attorney that they forego all legal rights and claim if they default at any point in time. What is required in a rent-to-own a home contract? Cover all bases. Number 1, include basic information such as the homeowner's name, tenant's name, address of property, and date agreement is being made. Number 2, clearly spell out contract terms. Included is how much the monthly rent will be, the date it is due, grace periods on that due date, how much of the rent will be applied to the sale price should the tenant opt to purchase the home, how many months the tenant has to complete his end of the bargain, how many unrelated people are allowed to reside in the home, the pet policy, and who is responsible for paying utilities, service charges, and owner must make a security deposit since they are considered a tenant until the end of the agreed term. Number 3, record the amount of the option fee, also called the option consideration. This is a non-refundable fee that the tenant pays before moving into the property. The fee is given in exchange for the homeowner's promise not to sell the property while the tenant resides there. If the tenant does purchase the home, 100% of this fee is non-refundable. The amount is negotiable, but normally ranges from 2 to 7% of the purchase price. This fee is not to be confused with the membership fee and security deposit that is collected in the event of any damage to the property. Number 4, record the terms of the rent credit. This is the percentage of each month's rent payment that will be credited to the purchase of the home, should the tenant choose to buy the property. This is a non-negotiable point, but the credit often reaches as high as 50% of the total rent payment. This provides advantages to the tenant and homeowner alike. The tenant builds equity in the property as he rents, and the homeowner is assured that they will either sell the home by the end of the contract or will have this rent credit in their pocket, as it's not generally refundable. Number 5, determine who is responsible for maintenance on the property during the rent-to-own period. Record who will be fixing the mechanicals, clogged drains, broken windows and doors, taking care of the yard, and paying any homeowner association fees. Most rent-to-own contracts state that any major repairs required to ensure habitability remain the homeowner's responsibility. In tough economic times, rent-to-own becomes a popular way for credit-impaired people with zero down payment and zero interest rate buyers and desperate to sell homeowners to strike a deal. Properly executed, a rent-to-own deal can provide a tenant with a home to live in while they rebuild their finances and amass equity in the property. For the seller, it provides monthly rental income and the potential that the home will be sold after an agreed-upon period of time at the end of the agreement. What are the rent-to-own procedures? In real estate, a rent-to-own arrangement means that a landlord and tenant have agreed that the tenant has the option to purchase the home they are currently renting by a set date. BlacPay R20 determines how much the sale price of the home is going to be and what is going to happen in the event the tenant is unable or decides not to purchase the home. A rent-to-own is a good option for a tenant who wishes to buy a home and enjoys zero interest rates, but doesn't have a down payment. Sales price. BlacPay R20 and tenant will write a contract that clearly states what the price of the home is going to be should the tenant exercise his option to purchase it. They need to carefully consider the price they're agreeing to, given the fact that the value of the home could dramatically increase during the time the option is held. Length of option. The average rent-to-own option lasts 3 to 5 years. If the tenant has negative marks against his credit that they believe will prevent them from securing a traditional mortgage, they should ask for a longer term so that they will have more time to repair their credit rating. Membership and option agreement fee. The tenant generally pays BlacPay R20 an option and membership fee in exchange for BlacPay R20's promise that we will not attempt to sell the home to another party during the term of the contract. The fee is non-negotiable, but most often ranges from 3 to 7% of the agreed-upon sales price. In this case, with BlacPay R20, it's a flat rate of $2,000. Rent credit. The issue of rent credit should also be addressed in the rent-to-own contract. A portion of the rent paid monthly in a rent-to-own situation goes into an equity payment account. The rent credit is generally between 30% and 50% of the total monthly rent payment. Say that BlacPay R20 and tenant agree that the rent credit is going to be set at 40%. If the tenant makes a monthly rent payment of $1,000, $400 of each payment will be applied to the sales price of the home. If the rent-to-own option runs for 3 years, the tenant will have $14,400 in the equity payment account. Maintenance issues. Like any other landlord, the landlord in a rent-to-own contract is responsible for making sure that the home is habitable and that the major systems like heating and cooling work properly. Because everything else is negotiable, prior to signing a contract, the parties involved should determine who is going to be responsible for maintenance issues like mowing the lawn and making small repairs to the home. Eventualities. Rent-to-own is not without potential pitfalls. The landlord and tenant should outline in writing what will happen in the event the tenant does purchase the home prior to the end of the contracted period and what will happen if he does not. Traditionally, the option fee that was paid at the beginning of the contract, as well as the rent credits paid each month, are deducted from the sales price of the home in the event the tenant purchases the property. If they are unable to secure financing or decide not to exercise their option to buy the home, they forfeit any money they have invested through the option fee and rent credits. Based on this training, you should be able to answer the following questions. What is the difference between present property value purchase and agreed future purchase value? Who determines the purchase value of the property? What determines the purchase value of the property? How do you determine a member's monthly contribution to a rent-to-own? Do we charge interest to our rent-to-own properties? Do we have a down payment rent-to-own program? What are the 5 reasons for the application process? Why is it necessary to have every applicant go through the membership application process? What is the membership application fee? Is the membership application fee a down payment? Is a membership application fee a refundable payment? Is the option agreement fee a refundable payment? What is the difference between a membership and an option agreement fee? What qualifies for a membership and option agreement payment? When members default, what percentage is refundable to them after eviction? While in the property, every member is a what? Given this $60,000 as current purchase value, what is the monthly contribution of the member for 15 years, 20 years, and for 25 years using the BlacPay option agreement calculation? Can a member buy multiple units for investment purposes? Can a rent-to-own member sublet their rented property? What does every property have as a sign for sublease? Congratulations, and thank you for completing your initial BlacPay R20 training.